Shalom, shalom, giving honor and praise unto Yah, the creator and the maker of heaven and earth. Going to go over a particular subject concerning an aspect of slavery. I hope it's understood. No offenses intended. However, certain things will be kind of raw concerning this kind of subject. All right, we're going to start off in a book entitled A History of the American People, all right, for edification purposes, so we all can gain an understanding of what we're talking about. This book that I'm citing is written by a guy named Paul Johnson. And on page 4 of this book, here is what we read, and it says as follows. In the 1440s, exploring the African coast for their newly acquired islands, the Portuguese rediscovered slavery as a working commercial institution. Slavery had always existed in Africa, where it was operated extensively by local rulers, often with the assistance of Arab traders. Slaves were captives, outsiders, people who had lost tribal status. Once enslaved, they became exchangeable commodities, indeed, an important form of currency. The Portuguese entered the slave trade in the mid 15th century, took it over, and in the process transformed it into something more impersonal and horrible than it had been either in antiquity or medieval Africa. So I just wanted to have that particular thing right there to have been read for edification purposes and for knowledge's sake, that the Portuguese were the ones who sat there and set off what we understand to be later on called the Atlantic slave trade. The next reference I will cite comes from a book entitled The Slave Trade by Hugh Thomas. Now, on Maccabees TV, this book was referenced inside of that Maccabees TV channel, Library Challenge number 2. And in this book, we're going to go to page 171. All right, so we can read part of what it says, and it says as follows. All right. Still, most slaves taken to New Holland, they averaged 1,500 a year in the late 1630s, continued to be captured at sea from Portuguese ships. So New Holland is what the Dutch called the place where they wound up going into. So that's something to be noted and understood for edification purposes. It's stated in that particular book, The Slave Trade, that many of the captives who became captives to the Dutch were kidnapped from the Portuguese. And we already previously read in a book entitled A History of the American People that the Portuguese were the ones who actually set off the slave trade. So that's something also to be noted and understood. I want to go in that same book, The Slave Trade by Hugh Thomas. We're going to go to page 174 so we can sit there and gain an insight concerning this aspect. It says concerning the guy who was named Robert Rich, and he became what we understand in history as the Earl of Warwick. It says the following concerning this gentleman. Rich already owned a tobacco plantation in Virginia and was probably hoping to secure black slaves to work it. A list of the living in Virginia in 1624 included 22 blacks. So I just wanted to have that to have been read so that way we can gain an understanding of what we're talking about. Black people were already slaves in Virginia, brothers and sisters, in the 1620s. So one of the things to point out real quick, when people try to give that fictitious meme about Anthony Johnson being the pioneer of American slavery in 1655, we understand, no, and able to show evidence of such that is not the case. All right, so I just want to sit there and have that to be noted and understood. We're going to continue in this same book, The Slave Trade by Hugh Thomas, and we're going to go, brothers and sisters, to page 155. And let's see what it says concerning this particular aspect. Now, what we're about to get into is the gentleman that many people know of in the slave trade as the guy that was named John Hawkins. And it says this: in 1562, John Hawkins initiated the English slave trade. No doubt his father, by then dead, had passed to him useful information about currents, geography, people, and markets. So that right there is something to be noted and understood concerning this particular aspect. John Hawkins was the worker by the time we get to the 1560s for Queen Elizabeth I. All right. So I just wanted that to be pointed out for edification purposes. We're going to go same book, brothers and sisters, but this time page 157. So we can sit there and gain an understanding concerning this kind of aspect. It says the following: all the same, Hawkins set off with 6 ships, of which 2 of this belonged to the Queen, meaning Queen Elizabeth. The young Francis Drake was on one of these ships. He had sailed with Lovell. The little fleet went down to Africa and, despite setbacks, eventually secured between 400 and 500 blacks, partly by kidnapping. Our general landed certain of our men seeking to take some Negroes, quote unquote, mostly by the customary Portuguese method of negotiation with African rulers. So just want to sit there and have that to be noted and pointed out, brothers and sisters, that the Portuguese set off the slave trade, the Dutch wound up piggybacking off of that, and then the English came along right after that aspect. All right, so let us continue on, brothers and sisters. John Hawkins that we read about actually died in the year 1595. All right, as we already went over before in this particular YouTube channel. I'm going to read a part of a book entitled The History of the Atlantic Slave Trade, Black Cargoes, Daniel P. Mannix, in collaboration with Malcolm Coley. And here's what it says: nobody knows who was the first Negro slave to reach the mainland of the New World, but he must have arrived there at an early date. Balboa had 30 Negroes with him when he discovered the Pacific. We're speaking in the year 1513. Cortez brought 300 slaves to the conquest of Mexico. Now, these slaves that Cortez brought were Negroes or blacks, and we're speaking in the year 1519 through 1521. By 1530, there were so many Negro slaves in Mexico that they plotted an uprising. There were also Negroes with Everardo when he went to Quito, Ecuador in the year 1534. The first Negro slaves were brought to Brazil in 1538. Probably the first Negro slaves to arrive on the United States mainland were imported by Lucas Vasquez de Leon in 1526. So that's something to be noted and pointed out for edification purposes. So before the 1619 date, you already had black people as slaves in what we call currently the state of South Carolina, brought there from what we call the place called Santo Domingo or the Dominican Republic by a guy named Lucas Vasquez de Leon. So that's something to be noted and pointed out. And brothers and sisters, we're going to sit there and continue on in this presentation concerning this kind of matter. Now, in the year 1619, you will sit there and read in your own time about a guy named Sir George Yardley, and he was the governor of Virginia at that time. Of the slaves that was brought there in 1619, he wound up actually having 15 of those 20. So he died in the year 1627. So when people try to sit there and state a silly argument by trying to sit up there and say, well, you have it to where a black man was the pioneer of American slavery, people are not actually doing their reference material in their reference work. All right, so let that be noted and understood. I want to go to another reference. This is written by John Franklin and Alfred Moss. The author's name that is, and the name of the book is entitled From Slavery to Freedom. And we're going to go in this particular actually college reference book on page 65. And let's see, brothers and sisters, what it says concerning this particular aspect. And it reads as follows. All right, so we can gain an understanding with this. Indeed, by the year 1640, some Africans in Virginia had become bond servants for life. The distinction between black and white servants was becoming well established. In that year, there were 3 runaway servants, 2 white and 1 black, were recaptured. The court ordered the white servants to serve their master 1 additional year. The black servant, however, was ordered to serve his said master of his assigns for the time of his natural life here or elsewhere. That guy's name, by the way, was a guy named John Punch. So that's something to be noted and understood. So when we're doing our reference material and our reference work, and people want to come with a concept of saying that a black man was the pioneer of American slavery in the year 1655, such is not accurate. When you go into your own time and your own records, you will read about a guy named Leonard Calvert. He was actually the governor of the state that we currently call Maryland. And he died in the year 1647. And he had slaves who were slaves for life in 1647. So that's something I wanted to point out. Lastly, for this particular aspect, we're going to go back in this book here entitled From Slavery to Freedom. And we're going to go, brothers and sisters, into page, if you will, 67. And let's see what it says concerning this kind of matter in Virginia. It says the following. The Virginia Slave Code, borrowing heavily from the practices in the Caribbean and serving as a model for other mainland codes, was comprehensive if it was anything at all. Slaves were not permitted to leave the plantations without the written permission of their masters. Slaves wandering about without such permits were to be returned to their masters. Slaves found guilty of murder or rape were to be hanged. For major offenses, such as robbing a house or a store, slaves were to receive 60 lashes and be placed in a pillory where their ears were to be cut off. For petty offenses, such as insolence and associating with whites or free blacks, they were to be whipped, branded, and or maimed. So I just wanted to sit there and have that to have been read for edification purposes so we can see, know, and understand the kind of aspect that our ancestors went through and so forth and so on, starting with the Portuguese and ending to when we get into other aspects with the Portuguese. Now, I want to show a couple of pictures, if we will, all right, for edification purposes. And what we're about to get into in this particular part shows this. Let's look, if we will, right? And these are taken from online with an intention for such. This right here is a mask that was put on slaves within the West Indies. And if you look closely, you see that there was a padlock within it in the back of it. This right here is another famous picture from the slave trade era. And this is speaking about what happened with our ancestors, the yoke of iron. Those Israelites know exactly where I'm going with that one. Then we have here a picture of what happened during the actual shipment of our ancestors from Western Africa to the West Indies and then also to the mainland of the Americas. And here we see a female with also the yoke of iron. The Israelites know where I'm going with that. As far as that concerned in that particular aspect during the enslavement of our ancestors. Then we see, emphatically if we will, more evidence of such. This right here is an actual map showing where our ancestors were taken from, where our ancestors were dropped off at Brazil, West Indies, North America. All right, so that's something to be pointed out for edification purposes. So I hope, know, and understand, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors went through things that's been documented, and for reference material, I want to show the books that I cited from. One book being this one right here. This one being called The Slave Trade. All right, this is written some years ago, and so forth and so on. The author is Hugh Thomas. Then we have here, pardon the cover, I used it several years ago, From Slavery to Freedom, okay, and that's what this book right here talks about. We referenced this. This book here also, entitled Black Cargoes. I bought this book when I was inside of a store one time. And then I have to ask everyone to excuse the cover, so I'm going to show the side of it. This is called A History of the American People by Paul Johnson. So that right there is some of the references that was shown. And all of it has been cited with references. The Irish ain't go through what we did. Peace.